Hello, 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 YouTube. It's your boy Robbie here. For today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the new Dream Theater album, Distance Over Time. For a little bit of background, Dream Theater are a progressive heavy metal band from Boston, formed in 1985. Although they were initially known as Majesty up until 1988, they sort of broke onto the scene with their 1992 sophomore album, Images and Words. And they've been releasing albums ever since, and I was always a fan of them because I'm generally a fan of progressive stuff that's, interesting and, not unoriginal. So I always also appreciate these guys because as a bass player, I love the fact that their bass player, John Myung, is just insane. Unfortunately, I sort of kind of lost faith in their ability to make music once I listened to 2016's The Astonishing, which I really didn't like that album. It's a 2-hour-long rock opera of sorts that's almost laughable at parts. So when they announced that this album was going to be released, I was like, hopefully they can release something good this time. You know what I mean? One of the first things I noticed about this album is that it's pretty short for a Dream Theater release. At only 57 minutes. It's less than half the length of their previous album, the aforementioned Astonishing, and is their third album to have no songs over 10 minutes in length. The other two being The Astonishing and their semi-obscure debut, When Dream and Day Unite. I feel that this album being kind of short really is for the better because the songs are straight and to the point, more coherent. The thing with writing really long, like prog odysseys, is that when they're good, but when they're bad, it's just not only is the song bad, but you have to spend a lot of time waiting for it to be over. That just becomes insufferable. On this album, they spend a lot less time noodling around and more just like getting to the point, which is just focusing less on song length and more on just writing a good song. The guitar playing on this album by John Petrucci, I really enjoy listening to because, like I said earlier, they spend a lot less time noodling around on their instruments, which is good because I can understand if you want to show off how good of a musician you are, but sometimes I'm like, okay, we get it, your skill, just write me a good song, okay? He also, in addition to his electric guitar shredding, adds in some nice acoustic riffs, such as on the opening track, Untethered Angel, and on the third track, Fall Into the Light, which the acoustic riff on that song kind of segues into a really sweet lick on electric guitar. He also writes some super nice heavy riffs, such as on the second track, Paralyzed, and the fifth track, Room 137, which, speaking of which, is the first ever song written by drummer Mike Mangini. And speaking of drummers, the drumming on this album is really, really good. A big debate amongst Dream Theater fans is who's better, Mike Mangini or their former drummer, Mike Portnoy. While I do feel personally that Mangini is a more technically skilled drummer, I kind of feel that Portnoy did more with his skill and was also pretty valuable to the band in terms of songwriting and managing the business side of stuff. Mangini, I feel, just kind of drums and that's it. But lyrically wise, this song isn't bad for a first try. And in terms of his actual playing, well, one of my biggest complaints about The Astonishing was that they kind of treated him like a session drummer. They didn't really give him a chance to be creative, and he really lets his creativity show on this album. It's not Portnoy-esque in any way, but it's still really, really fucking good. Now, as for the bass playing, I mentioned earlier that John Myung was a really big inspiration of mine. I was hoping that on this album they'd give him lots of chances to show off his technical ability. They don't do that. However, the fourth track, Barstool Warrior, has a really cool bass fill, and the sixth track, S2N, has an incredible bass solo to start off the song. And of course, whenever John Petrucci starts playing a guitar solo, since they don't really overdub rhythm guitar on many of these songs, you can hear his bass pretty well, and he does a really good job of supporting Mr. Petrucci. Now, as for the keyboard playing on this record, because, well, keyboards are important in prog metal, I really think that Jordan Rudess kind of outdid himself because it's incredible. I mean, his best tracks are Fall Into the Light, S2N, At Wit's End, which is probably my favorite song on the album, and the eighth track, Out of Reach. He really, one of my complaints about him in the past was that he tended to just do arpeggio tornadoes, which just kind of, again, goes into the noodling around territory of kind of just showing off your ability. But he really has great note choice on this album, knowing what to play and when to play it. I also want to take some time and talk about the closing track, Pale Blue Dot, on this record, because, an album's closing track is pretty important. And honestly, I think this song does a really good job of closing out the album. The intro has a bunch of sound samples in it that kind of sounds sort of ominous and spooky. There's a super heavy main riff that has some nice string effects in the background to add to the atmosphere. And it really sort of reminds me of some classic Dream Theater, like something off of Images and Words. There's also a bonus track called Viper King, and honestly the main riff to this song is sort of funny sounding. I kind of laughed out loud when I heard it the first time, and this is a great song, so I can kind of feel why they'd leave it off the official track listing, because, wouldn't really fit in well with the rest of the songs. Now, having said all of that positive stuff, my one complaint is that this album is sort of, unremarkable. It's a great album, but that's kind of just it. I mean, there weren't a lot of moments that really jumped out of me, except for the 7th track, At Wit's End, which, like I said earlier, is probably my favorite song, Within a half hour of listening to this album, I had forgotten most of the riffs, honestly, and I can't imagine myself, listening to this album in my free time, because, like I said, it's great, and that's really it. Despite this, I really enjoyed this album, and I would give it a 9 out of 10. That's all I have for today, YouTube. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. What were your thoughts on this album? Be sure to leave them in the comments below. I would love to read them, get some constructive criticism. Basically, hear you all tell me how wrong I was and that I'm an idiot. Yeah, that's really it. See you guys next week.